Today's guest runs a portfolio of companies that generates him $700,000 a day.
Don't analyze your fuel. If you need to use revenge as your fuel to become successful, which you want, then use it.
Raised to chase the corporate dream, he found himself lost, stuck in a life that his father had scripted for him.
2025 so far has been the worst year of the last 8 years. At the beginning of the year, I had 8 lawsuits. People want to be like, that's not fair. It's like, well, life isn't quite fair.
Today, he's rewritten his purpose, educating entrepreneurs around the world and on track to become a billionaire by 40.
What's motivation, right? No one knows. But I can say that it's the equal opposite of deprivation. And so if I wanted to motivate someone to behave in a way different than they normally do, I'd want to deprive them of something.
In this episode, we'll dive into his frameworks on building discipline, the power and potential found in human suffering, and how anyone can achieve absolute freedom. Alex Hormozi, welcome to the Jack Neel Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I hope I live up to that introduction.
I would say it's probably pretty likely. A good place to start here, Alex. So in 2008, the editor-in-chief of the Gilman News published a poem called Drowsy.
Okay.
Do you remember this?
Barely.
I'll give you a little bit of it.
Yeah.
You're sore, can't take it anymore. Your forearms cramp from typing. Are you hungry, or is it just another excuse to stop? You won't, you can't. This poem reads like someone trying to outgrind exhaustion. And it seems like since a young age, you've always had this level of deep discipline, realizing that hard work is the goal. If hard work is the goal, what is the path to getting there?
I think it is the path. So I think the point of it is that the process itself, like the thing that you do every day, if you can measure success by how closely you emulate the path that you want to follow, then rather than winning once every 2 years, once every decade, when you achieve whatever, destination you're quote walking towards, then you can win every day and really every moment, as long as you're staying on that path. And so I think that's how I think about work. That's wild that you found that poem.
You had a few others in there. One was called Ice Cream, about a girl who you saw eating ice cream. And it made you sad.
Seems on brand.
Yeah, I think we also found some old yearbook photos. It's
that's
pretty entertaining.
wild.
But
hopefully you didn't find, never mind. Well, we had Luigi, whatever the shooter is, he was valedictorian of many years after me.
Really?
Yeah, Gilman.
That's fascinating. Were you
apparently just turned out some very sad guys.
Were you valedictorian of your class?
No, I wasn't.
Gotcha. Okay.
I was top 10%.
On hard work, today you preach discipline and consistency, but also sustainability. How do you know if you're working too hard?
So too hard is such a hard concept to like I would be like, what does too hard even mean? I think that you have a rate of output that occurs over a period of time. And if the rate of output decreases kind of precipitously at some point, then you're not being effective anymore. And so like on a micro level, even hour to hour throughout a day, your output will go down, and then you have to sleep at some point. Then you wake up and then your output goes up again. And so I think like the idea of being burned out, like I don't think anyone's like, people don't burn out when they're playing video games. Not really. I mean, maybe some people, but like for the most part, you can like kind of keep doing it. And I think that burnout just means that the reward for the work that you're doing has either you have habituated to that reward, so you've gotten used to it, so it no longer really rewards you anymore, or the cadence of that reward, which is meaningful, has continued to extend in terms of how frequently you get rewarded, which are both two different ways of basically saying the same thing, which is just you're not getting out of it what you wanted to get out of it. And so I think that is when people quote get burned out. I don't think it has anything to do with the amount of work that you're doing. So I think it's about what's happening around you while you're working rather than the work itself. Because there are I like looking at things across like many thousands of years. And so even the idea of a 40-hour work week is a pretty modern invention. And if you look at, even a few hundred years ago, people just worked every day. And it wasn't like, oh my God, that guy's so hardcore. It's just like he just worked every day because that was just kind of the expectation, and you just like had to live and had to survive. And if he had enough to eat for a day off, he could probably do that if he wanted to. And so I think about that a lot, which is Like a lot of these confines are self-inflicted. And I think laddering up the belief set to like, does this serve me? And so the idea of like, you know, how do you develop work ethic? I think the big thing is like, it's not really developing work ethic. It's doing the things that you have been rewarded for doing in the past and removing things that you don't enjoy as much. And then it gets easier to do more because you enjoy doing the thing you're doing. Now, let me be clear. I don't like, there's overhead. Of course, there's things that I do that I don't enjoy doing, but there's food that you eat that you don't immediately like, but maybe you like dessert. And that's like, so it's really just like, again, it's a cadence of reinforcement. It's like, how many times am I being reinforced over a period of time? And maybe if anything, the thing that gets developed is that you develop a history of being rewarded for delaying gratification over a period of time. But, you know, it's weird. Like I get a lot of, I mean, even like the intro that you gave, it's like, I get a lot of press, if you could call it that, or like flowers for having, you know, huge work ethic, but like, it just doesn't feel, and this isn't like, oh, I do what I love. I'm miserable all the time. Like, it's like, there's plenty of times I'm miserable for extended periods of time. I just like, don't really know what else I would do. And so work is just kind of like my default setting. And so people are like, oh my God, that guy works 7 days a week on end. And it's like, yeah, but it's like, so have many people. I'll give you a different frame to like contextualize this. So we have a team here, we have an advisory practice, and you know, for the team to spend all day with clients in person, it's like, oh my God, this is exhausting and we have to present and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, well, I mean, teachers present in front of groups all day, every day, all the time. And it's not like a big deal. It's just like, that's just how it is. And so just reframing something that we see as the big thing, as something that somebody else in a different context does all the time, is probably the most regular practice that I do, which is like, how can I, in what universe would this not be hard? In what universe would this be normal? And well, then I'll just live in that universe. Make sense?
Yeah.
That's kind of how I think about it.
I guess to go off what you're saying, I think it's common sentiment preached online, like I wake up at 4, stop working at 10 p.m.
Sure.
And I guess what I'm curious is, it seems like you believe that people have throughout history worked for extended periods of time, but is that on mentally strenuous tasks necessarily? Because I think of this podcast, for instance, and you might get diminishing returns, but if I recorded 10 podcasts in a day or 20 podcasts in a day, I'm probably going to do it differently than how I would do it if I were doing one in a day. You might put different types of energy. It might be more passive. You might be a little less active listening. So do you believe that you can still build that muscle of working for like mentally strenuous tasks?
Absolutely.
Really?
No question. No hesitation.
Even for writing, like you've like gone like 16
Absolutely.
hours. Really?
Absolutely.
And do you have any advice for building that metric?
Doing it more. Like, I mean, 100%. It's repetition. It's volume. Like what you just like fundamentally, if we describe a behavior set within a given condition, then it's a skill that we can develop. And we develop skills through modeling, and we develop through role playing with basically seeing what other people do and then doing it ourselves. And so like, it doesn't matter what you're trying to learn. If you like, and it's just that there are some skills that people think reading, people think math, people think like public speaking, like these are all skills, but it's like, in what way does podcasting not fall into that category? In what way does having a conversation not fall into that category? Of course it does. And so I don't see it as any different. The only thing is that you want to have some sort of feedback loop so you can make it even better. But even just the fact of just like, after every podcast, if you had 5 minutes, you're like, okay, what did I do well? What can I do better? And then the next day, reviewing all the podcasts and then doing it again, like eventually you would no longer get fatigued from it, because you'd habituate. And so for that one podcast, if you only do one a month, you're probably gonna have, you know, your adrenals will dump while you're having the podcast. You have, you know, anxiety, your heart rate goes up, you start sweating. But if you do it all the time, then it no longer creates an adrenal response because you were just accustomed to doing it. And so, I mean, my goal is just to go through the habituation cycle as fast as humanly possible. So I just get used to it. But like, I'll do a consulting day for 12 straight hours. And I'm pretty fresh at the end. I enjoy doing it. I like doing it. And so, and I'm not saying that like, that's how I've always been. It's just like, I've done it over time. And, answering questions even ad hoc, it's like, how can you answer questions? It's like, well, I'll tell you two different stories. So when I gave my first public speech, that wasn't in high school. When I was in high school, I was really nervous because I didn't know the subject matter that well because it was, Civil War, whatever, right? Or, pro or cons, affirmative action, whatever. You have to make some debate. Fast forward, I get on stage. My first stage I ever spoke on as a business person had 1,200 people in the audience. First stage ever. And I remember as I was walking up on stage, I was like, why am I not nervous right now? It was like very weird. I was like, I should be nervous. Why am I not nervous? I've been nervous all the other times I've spoken. And so I thought about it, and it was, I have been doing 8 public speaking things a day for years because at my gym, I had a microphone, same headset, big speakers that I could hear myself on. And I had a bunch of adults in a room that I had to tell what to do. And I did that every single hour on the hour, 8 hours a day. And then I still ran the business on top of that. And so I'd done that for years. And so when I got up on stage, I was like, oh, I'm just telling another group of people while I have a headset on about something that I already know about. And so that was kind of the making where you start to have, domain generalizations like, okay, something I did here also applies over here. And so it doesn't need to be a big deal. And so that kind of pattern recognition of like, what other time have I done something like this that it wasn't a big deal? Why can't I just use that as the frame of reference for how I'm going to think about what I'm doing right now?
That's a really good answer.
Thanks.
You kind of have this philosophy of people like to do things that they're good at, right? Mm-hmm. And that kind of comes from building volume over time.
Yeah.
Is it your belief that most people know what they're good at?
No. Well, I'll say this. You do what you have been rewarded for doing in the past. And that is kind of like my North Star of everything. And that's basically the behaviorist view of the world, which is people do what they've been rewarded for doing in the past. So, quote, bad people just behave that way because they've been rewarded for behaving in a, quote, bad way in the past. And so they do it. And if they've been punished for doing that, and punish doesn't mean from an outside source, it's just something happened that they didn't want to have happen, an aversive stimulus. And so they would stop doing that, right? And the difficulty is attribution around the skill. So it's basically, where's the causal relationship coming from? And typically people will look at what happened before something, like what's the trigger, and that people use that word. But the trigger is false. It's really, the trigger is just the circumstance that gets created that repeats a behavior you've done in the past that you've been rewarded for. And so I gave this example when I was talking to Graham, but I'll bring it up because I think it's useful. It's like, Leila and I would get into some sort of spat about something, whatever. And I realized that I wouldn't get into a spat, but like if she was crying about something, and it didn't have to be related to me, but she could just be crying for whatever reason. I realized that I tended to get angry when she would cry. And she was like, why do you get angry at me when I'm crying? And I would get angry, and then she would stop crying because then she would get defensive, but the crying would stop. And so she inadvertently rewarded me for getting angry at her in the condition of her crying. So the trigger for me getting angry is her crying. Is it? Or is it the fact that when I have gotten angry in the past, she stopped? And so like, okay, well, why did you get angry the first time? Because that would be the key question. And so what ends up happening is that if you encounter an obstacle that you don't know how to overcome, you do basically something called an extinction burst, which is a series of different behaviors to try and elicit the desired result. And so the easiest way of thinking about this is like a 4-year-old kid who's at a candy, the candy aisle right before they check out, and they say, I want a candy. And so the first thing they'll do is say, Mom, I want a candy. And then the mom says no. And then the child changes behavior and says, please, pretty please, blah, 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 blah. They beg. That doesn't work. So then they shout and scream. And so all they're doing is basically flipping through the cards of behavior. They don't do this consciously, but they're just flipping through the cards of behavior until one of them gets them what they want. And so then when a parent has a child, for example, that has tantrums repeatedly, it means that at some point earlier on, they had a tantrum and then they got what they wanted. And so what you did is you rewarded tantrum having rather than rewarding non-tantrum having, right? And so when I think about this with regards to, what was the original question? So I can find my way back.
Do most people know what they're good at?
Yeah. And so the thing is that we have been rewarded for doing things in the past. And so when people are like, why are you the way that you are? I would just say like, I have been rewarded in the past for behaving this way. And so I just continue to seek out those rewards. And so these behaviors have worked for me. And the thing is that these skills generalize across domains. So Like working hard, for example, it's like if you do something where you have an extended period of time where you have effort before you have a reward and it works out well, then I'm more likely to repeat that behavior in another condition. And so people are excellent at Netflix and chilling. People are excellent at delaying tasks. People are excellent at avoiding confrontation. Why? Because they've been rewarded for doing so. And the problem with it is that there's multiple different types of reward that happen over different timelines. And if this sounds complex, it's like, that's why it's a whole field of study. But basically you have latency is the biggest confounder for a causal relationship around a behavior. Meaning, Facebook can addict you because there's a little light that turns red, but it's immediate. So they will better addict people to Facebook by giving that dot immediately than saying, I'll give you $1 in 30 days. Now, the people who have been rewarded in the past for waiting over a period of time after working would do better with the delayed reward. But most people don't have that kind of reward cycle. They've never done anything for a long period of time. And so I think the laddered up question is like, how do you get people to just try that first time where they're just willing to push out when they get rewarded for the work they're putting in? And the answer is, I don't know. I think at some point people call it chance, call it, they read some article and they decide to actually try something for an extended period of time. But I guess I would reject the original premise of the question, which is I think many people are good at many things. They're just not good at the things they want to be good at.
I guess to get more specific, how can people identify their competitive edge? Because an example I think of with your content, for instance, you run like a big media channel, and if you're posting, let's say you're looking at results and you think, well, motivational content seems to be doing well. Let's push out more motivational content. But it's not like maybe you don't consider, and I'm assuming you do, that maybe it does well because Alex has a nice soothing voice. Maybe it's because the visual hook is the way the set looks. A lot of people don't consider the multiplicity of factors. Like, how can you get better at identifying those things?
I mean, how do you figure out what you're good at?
Yeah, because there's volume and then there's also reflection on the volume. And how do you get better at the reflection portion?
Yeah, so it's volume times feedback loops. So if you think about skill acquisition in general, now this is relatively well documented, but if I want to learn any new skill, so rather than saying what am I good at, I think it's sometimes more valuable to say what do I want to get good at? Now, people have, quote, proclivities, or they're like, oh, I'm naturally predisposed to these things. Maybe, but you can't control your genetics and maybe you don't know. And maybe it was just a nurture thing that earlier on, I remember I had this, and I will loop around to the answer, but I was in college and one of my favorite professors, he taught a class called systematic inquiry, which is basically how do you ask questions and answer them, which is great. And he's a super nurture over nature guy in terms of his thought process around the world. And I tend to skew more towards the nurture side as well. And he said, all the things that you guys think you're naturally good at, you're not naturally good at, you just got good at them earlier. And so I was like, I've always been really good at languages. And I was like, I feel like that's something. And he just looked at me and he was like, I mean, do you have a parent that speaks another language, or there's someone in your life? And I was like, oh yeah, both my parents are bilingual. And I spoke French as my first language. And he was like, why are we even talking? And it was it felt so, because I didn't see it was so natural to me that I didn't even think about it. But the very first, my existence was two languages. And so incorporating third, or even seeing English differently, was something that, quote, came natural to me, but it was just I had a different skill set that was repeated earlier on. And so to the original question in terms of skill acquisition, it's you have a volume of activity that you're doing. So if I want to learn how to, play the trumpet, it'd be I'm going to play the trumpet for an hour, and then I'm going to look at other people who play the trumpet and compare what my notes sound like to compare what their notes sound like. And the fastest way to do that is to have an expert tutor. I'm a huge fan of tutoring. It is the fastest way to learn. The second fastest is in small groups. And the third is to join a community of people who already have the same skill. And then you can basically learn through osmosis. And when I say learn through osmosis, it's just learn through observation of the small skills and skills that they do on a regular basis that increase the likelihood they get what they want. But I'll say one thing, if you want to learn something, whatever it is, the fastest thing to do is go into a community of people who already know how to do that thing well. It's bar none, fastest thing. You'll get many different feedback loops from many different sources. And you'll be able to tease out what are the few truths rather than the mysticism that's kind of associated with the whole space. Because every space has mysticism around it and magic. But there's usually a few core truths that are always true amongst all people for the skill.
That makes a lot of sense.
We're going skills. We're going, we're going super amorphous.
On the reward portion you were speaking about, the ability to kind of wait before you get the result. How do you decide an opportunity is worth 10 years of your time?
I think even in asking the question, it's a question that I probably wouldn't ask. And so maybe there is some outcome that would be material, but immediately I go to what would my days look like? And I tend to reverse from that. So it's like if an opportunity, like how would I determine that an opportunity is worth doing? Well, maybe there's many different big opportunities that exist, but which is the one that has the most days in a row that I would like to live? And then I'll pursue that one because I think the likelihood that I stick with it is pretty high if I like what I'm doing every day.
That's a great framework. And how could people maybe know what their days would look like?
I mean, I think asking people and observing people. So people who are already doing whatever you're looking for, that's one. The best is observation because someone's ability to communicate what they do and your ability to comprehend it is basically two filters it has to go through that are different from reality. Observation is just one. And so it's just you direct into your brain, right? And so I think observation itself is also a skill of like, if you want to learn I use sales a lot because it's just such an easy skill for people to understand. It's like, if I want to be the best salesperson, I can ask the best salesperson what they do, but some of the best salespeople aren't even conscious of what they do. And so observing what they do oftentimes has taught me significantly more than asking. And shoot, we have to do this with our own videos. It's like, what makes these videos better than other videos? Well, I did something differently, so let's look at what I did. And a lot of times the excellence just comes from observing random chance in a recorded setting. It's like every time we make any piece of content, anytime you have any sales call, any conversation, any presentation, any email, any whatever, you're rolling a dice where you're trying to control as many variables as you can, but there's always going to be new variables. And so when you have these kind of outliers or these above average outcomes, it's like, what was different that happened here and how can I repeat it again? And so that's because I believe that prediction is control. And so let me hedge that. But basically, if you can absolutely predict what someone is going to do because you understand all the variables, then you control that person. So again, people don't like that. It's no one likes the idea of being controlled, but like, I just like to use this as a natural hypothetical example. So if I'm in an auditorium of 100 people and I'm on stage and I'm speaking, if I said, who here thinks that I can get everybody to get naked, right? Most people will probably be like, no, I don't think that's going to happen. But what you'd have to do is you would just like lock all the doors and then you'd crank the heat to 200 and like people would get naked. And so if I control the variables, like you control the behavior. And so trying to increase the likelihood that a certain action happens in the world is just really how well do I understand all the variables that contribute to that outcome. And the difficulty is that there's usually just a lot of variables. And so I think mastery over time is just understanding how to influence each of the variables that increase the likelihood that the desired outcome happens. And when you have that, then people are like, man, he's so good at telling the future. This investor is so good at predicting these outcomes. It's just like he has identified the vast majority of the variables that predict. And so his predictions are more accurate than other people's. And that's kind of at least how I see it. And I could be totally wrong. Let me give you something useful for everyone. So like I deal with obviously a lot of employees, founders, et cetera, like throughout my days. And one of the frames that comes up a lot is so-and-so isn't, doing what I want them to do, or I have to have this hard conversation with somebody. Most times people will try to have the conversation to make themselves feel better. But if we flip the question to what would I like to have happen, number one, and then number two, what increases the likelihood that occurs, you do a very different set of behaviors. So I'll give you an example. I had a friend of mine who's a pretty big influencer creator, whatever you want to call it. You would know they are. And she had basically a beef with a different creator who had like stolen some stuff or something like that. And so she was like, hey, what do you think I should say to this guy? And I was like, well, what do you want to have happen? And she like thought for a second and she didn't really have a clear answer. I was like, well, if I were you, I would want to decrease the likelihood this occurs in the future. Does that sound like a fair outcome? She was like, yeah. I was like, okay, well, does you yelling at him for it decrease the likelihood that occurs in the future? Or does he just do it and then he's just not friends with you? And she was like, huh. And what happens is oftentimes like you go through enough of those loops and you're like, maybe I just don't really gain anything from saying anything. I'm like, yeah, probably. And so I have an internal joke with my closest friend, Dr. Kashi, which is we call it the undefeated champion of the world, which is the third path, which is do nothing. And so many times, like when you run through all the scenarios, most of the times we just want to do something because we want to feel better. But it actually doesn't increase the likelihood that we want to have happens. Most times you'll just increase the likelihood for retaliation. And so me yelling at someone just increases the likelihood that they yell back at me or that they try to do something to counter control me. And so it's like, well, I would rather just like not play. This game has prizes and I don't want any of them.
When is the time to play?
When there's prizes you want to win and you think that there's a path that you have a high likelihood of winning them. My dad used to say this to me when I was really young, and I don't think I really fully grasped it until I was older. But he said, I don't play unless I know I can win. And I think part of it may be because he just didn't want to play games with me, who knows? But that sounds ugly. No, my dad's great. But the thing that I took that like later on, and I took that as like, one, many games are not worth playing. And two, if you are going to play a game, understand the players and understand the rules so that you can increase the likelihood that you win, right? And if you can come into a game saying like, well, obviously there's risk that's always involved. There's things that happen, but I think from the moniker perspective of like that saying, I think I've carried that with me. Like, why would I play unless I know there's a strong chance that I can win? And if I don't think there's a strong chance that I can win, how can I increase my odds? Like what unfair advantages can I create for myself? And if I don't know it, then I don't understand the game well enough, which means I probably shouldn't play until I understand it.
I want to go back to something you said a minute before, because last interview I asked Leila if there were any unexpected consequences of becoming famous on the internet. And she basically hinted at no, besides the hate portion. And I guess I just want to know tactfully, how do you guys get into an opportunity and have a really good idea of what it's going to look like? Because it's kind of the balancing, I'm going to have to do a lot of volume to acquire this skill, but also I kind of know what work it's going to take. Because content, or when you switched, I think you sold Alan and went to acquisition pretty quickly after. Had you just been observing like different private equity and that kind of thing?
There was a few things that kind of contributed to starting acquisition.com. One is that Leila and I had made 2 investments in 2020 prior to us selling the company at the end of 21. So we'd almost had a year and a half where we'd made these 2 investments and they'd gone really, really well. And I was like, this is really cool. And then when we ended up going through the process of selling Alan and Prestige Labs and Gym Launch all in 2021, we dealt with a lot of private equity firms. And I remember there was a moment where I was sitting at the table and it was all of their team, the private equity team, and all of my team. And I had a few kind of like conclusions that I came away from. Number one is that their team was more talented than my team. And that's why their team was going to make more than mine. And the second was that the guy who was about to buy the business from me was going to make more money on my business than I was. And I was like, huh. And he didn't even start it or found it or know anything about gyms. And I was like, that's weird. And I was like, he has a better game. And so I was like, I should learn more about that game. And so then I spent basically all of 2021 talking to every single investor I possibly could, every person in the financial world I could get my hands on, basically, to try and understand a model but I was like, how do I enter that game? Because like, I don't have 10 people who I know who went to Harvard and, have all these banking connections. Like, I don't know any of those people. And so I was like, okay, well, what can I do that they can't do? And I was like, I'm pretty good at marketing. And so I was like, okay, well, I did hear and I understood better that one of the things of making, a good investor is being a good picker. But I could increase the likelihood that I make good picks if I just have way more to pick from. And so I was like, okay, so it's really just a marketing problem. So if I can just get more deal flow that wants to do deals with me, then I'll have a better pick and the deals that I'll be able to negotiate will be more advantageous, even if I'm not the brightest tool in the shed. And so that was kind of the thesis behind it was, can we build, and to be fair, when we started, I was like, I didn't know if it was going to work. I just thought of it in likelihoods. I was like, well, there's a few need to believes. I have to believe that I can make, content that will give views. So I didn't know, but I was like, I'll see. They do things. I can try and model what those people do. The second thing that I had to need to believe is like, okay, if I do make content and it does work, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to translate to people who want to do deals with me or do business with me. So that was a second need to believe. And so those were probably like the two big ones that kind of straddled the decision overall, but they felt believable. And so I was like, worst case scenario, I'll just build an audience that doesn't generate deal flow and I'll figure something else out. But that just felt like a pretty good idea at the time, which was if you can build an audience that trusts you because of value that you've provided over an extended period of time, then I just had faith that I would figure out what to do later.
If content was your business, how would you scale?
Can you ask the question differently?
If you were to monetize through the content, let's just say AdSense solely,
yeah,
what would you be doing differently, if anything, aside from maybe just more volume?
I probably wouldn't be going after a tiny slice of a segment, which is what I go after. So business owners, it's like 9% of America owns a business. Of the 9% of America that owns a business, only 5% are over $1 million a year. Of the 5% that are over $1 million a year, well, I guess of the 9%, the 9%. So 1 out of 250 makes it to $10 million a year. 1 out of roughly 2,500 makes it to $100 million a year. So like, it's a very small slice of the pie that I make my content for. And so by its very nature, I don't get massive distribution. I get decent distribution, but not like an entertainer might. And so if I wanted to make only making money from media my own thing, then I would do super, super broad topics and things that are just human based. And I mean, that would basically be it, right? You just pick a topic that transcends all races, all cultures, all people, and entertainment is the easiest one because everyone wants to laugh. Everyone wants to be distracted. And so that's why entertainers will always be bigger than educators as a category.
On brand, I know you've recently, maybe not recently at this point, in the past year, kind of delved into business content to go deeper, to kind of get more deal flow for acquisition and provide more value to business owners. Do you believe it was important, though, to establish some of the other types of content you did originally around fitness, nutrition, et cetera?
It's so funny because like I've only made, I think like 3 pieces of content in total on fitness, and they still have like contributed to the overall like brand makeup. If you think about the brand as like a mosaic with lots of little pieces. But I do have some pretty updated thoughts on this, which is just, I see there's marketing and there's personal branding and there's an intersection between those things. And so if I only wanted to advertise for the business, then I think that I would be just fine making only content about business. I also have a personal brand, and I want the personal brand to be as accurate a reflection of me as humanly possible. And so my measure for that is like, my mental image is like glass, which is that like if there's a glass wall and I'm on the other side and there's a room and there's all this stuff inside, but inside the glass wall is dark. I think about the content as like a flashlight that just focuses on one area of my life. And I want the flashlight basically over time to illuminate the whole room so that if someone were to walk in, they would see everything and they wouldn't be surprised. They'd be like, this is accurate. This is exactly what I expected. And to me, that's what, personal branding done right is that when someone meets me in person, I'm exactly as they expected. And of course, it's difficult because you can't control, even with more volume, you can't control the reach. So I know that if I make a video about a relationship, I'm going to get 10 times the views, period. If I make a video about fitness, I'm going to get 5 or 10 times the views, period, because it just affects more people. And so I have to be really careful with those pieces of content because even if I make 1 out of 10 is fitness, it'll still look like I have a 50-50 fitness versus business brand because I get 10 times the views, even though it's 1/10 of my volume. And so I can make very, very small percentage of content that will proportionally represent me. And I think this is kind of what the curation of a brand is, which is like trying to kind of manage it like a garden. Some weeds grow faster than others. Not to say that, fitness is a weed or anything like that, but there are just some plants that grow faster. And so I have to basically, this is the management of hedging okay, you know what, this is underrepresented. We need to make more of this for a while. And then you kind of survey the landscape and you're like, okay, we can drop a little bit of this in, even though I know this is miracle grow and it's going to, grow like crazy. And I want that to be a representation of me. And so if I look at my life just in terms of hours, like whatever, 168 hours a week, it's like I probably spend 10 hours a week, maybe 12 doing fitness stuff out of 168. So it's like, okay, that's it. That's what should be proportionally represented in the content that I have. If I, am with Leila and we're doing like, romancy things, if you want to call that for 4 to 8 hours a week, then it's like, cool, then that's what I'm spending there. If I work, 12 hours a day, the other day, the other hours of the day, then I want that to represent the vast majority of my content, because the vast majority of my life is business. And so that's kind of how I think about curating. It's not like, oh, I have these 5 content buckets and I have to hit them all. It's just like, who am I? And also I go through seasons. There are probably some seasons where I'll be more, romance oriented because Leila and I are going through that season for our relationship. And I might, like right now, I'm on a pretty big fitness swing. And so I'm actually working out pretty hard right now and I'm enjoying it a lot. And so it wouldn't surprise me if I make a little bit more fitness stuff, which I probably plan to. But the reason I also shy away from relationship and fitness content is that there's no objective reality. And so like there's no relationship billionaire. The only qualifier for a successful marriage is that you are not divorced. That's it. That's it. That's all there is. You're not divorced. And until you're at like, until you're like 80, no one cares. And so it's like, it's like, this is what's working for us. We've been married, over 8 years. Use it if it's useful for you, And to the same degree, fitness, because there is, quote, scientific studies, and I'm putting quotes around this because every bro under the sun, if you've ever consumed any fitness content, there's like 100 guys who are armchair PhDs. I just like, I'll be like, this is what's worked for me. And then one guy can pull up one study, another guy can pull up a conflicting study. And it's just like, I don't care. Like, do whatever you want. This is what's worked for me. And so I try to take it from that perspective, which is how I, not how to. And if I am going to do a how to, I'll usually put a caveat of like, under these conditions. Like if you're trying to maximize for money, this is what I would do. Not, this is how you make more money. It's like, well, it depends on what's your goal.
Yeah. I think that's a great framework for being authentic, because so many people talk about it, but that actually gives measurable outcomes to look at.
Well, do you want to I'll give you a fun definition for authenticity, which is how you behave when you have no chance of punishment. So oftentimes when you're alone, no one can really punish you. And so that is how you behave. That's you being authentic. What you think to yourself in your mind is often your authentic self, your authentic thoughts. And so if your actions and your words match those thoughts, then I would say that you are acting authentically. The problem is, if your thoughts or the way that you behave in private is in any way against cultural norms or rules, then you cannot be authentic. Or rather, there are degrees of authenticity. How authentic are you, rather than are you authentic or not? And I think most people would just strive to be more authentic, and just seeing it as a continuum rather than a binary.
Again, I think that's a great definition. Kind of showing what your life looks like. I had a mentor talk to Dr. Kashi, and he said that you had...
You talked to Dr. K?
Yeah, he did for me. He was like, what should Jack ask Alex about?
He's the GOAT.
And he mentioned that you have a bunch of books that are just kind of vaulted, stored away.
Yeah.
But out of the ones, maybe not ones that you've written anything, is there anything that you want to write a book about?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, we, because it'll be Trevor and I. We will write the behavior book. We will write it. And I think it will be the book that sells more than all my books put together. That's me calling it. Yeah.
Do you have any idea of what a main focus might be, or maybe something you're thinking about in terms of behaviors right now?
It's an operating system. How to see the world. And I think that I won't publish it until I feel like I have a good foundation to publish it from. So I would say that I haven't, achieved the things that I would like to achieve before publishing it. And so I have to achieve those things. And then once I can achieve those things, or once I have achieved those things, then I will publish it. But basically that operating system, my relationship with Dr. Kashi has changed my life more profoundly than any relationship that I've had. And it was because it defining language has made the world make sense. And the vast majority of people spend a lot of their time talking to other people and thinking that they're communicating when really they make face noise at the other person, and that person can't define any of the terms that they're hearing, and then just has some loose definition that they don't really operate on, that they're listening. And that's why, the vast majority of the time, like, nothing occurs when people talk. They just like make noise at each other because they've been rewarded for making noise at each other in the past, right? And so in thinking about that, I think I've gotten much better as a communicator. I've gotten much better as a teacher. I've gotten much better as a learner, because I can observe, I think, the pieces that matter most, which is, what are the actions? What are they doing, right? And so it all, like, this is my view of the world, is that everything comes down to behavior. What do you do? And it's observing all the tiny nuances and all the tiny details that are all important, because if there's many variables, and this is a B.F. Skinner quote, but if many variables exist, many variables must be studied. And so that's basically the viewpoint. And, people will say like, hey, I want to be more honest, or I want to be more courageous. And it's like, well, what does that mean? And they're like, I don't know. I'm like, right, well then how can you get there? How can you become that if you don't know how to do that? And then it gets very real, because you're like, how do you do that? And then that's where basically the field of study begins. What does it mean to be courageous? What does it mean to be authentic?
Do you believe most adjectives, adverbs, are like illy defined in general?
100%. Totally. I also think there's a lot of words that mean the same thing.
Is there any one word that you've been thinking about lately?
That
you're like, how do we define this?
No. As they come up, Trevor and I have conversations, and we'll be like, what do you think this means? And we're like, well, and we just think, and the way that you have to think through from a behavior lens is, what would occur in the world or in the environment in front of us for us to know that this adjective had happened? And so this is like, and this is why I think teaching, has been really helpful for me in terms of the same behavioral lens, which is, Emily's lazy. Okay. Why am I saying that? I'm describing her as lazy, but I'm describing her as lazy because I observed something. What did I observe? When was the first time I thought that she was lazy? And is there multiple times that I thought she was lazy? Okay, let's track back to that, because usually you'll just ascribe a label, never think about why you put the label there, and then you just call Emily lazy. But like, there's something or multiple things that she did. And so maybe Emily was slow to respond to Slack. Or maybe, I just saw Emily walk in late to a meeting. Or, she sent me, I said, hey, you owed me this thing. She delivered it late, and then I reminded her, and then she gave me something that was just crappy. I'm like, oh, she's lazy. But then when I say, Emily, stop being lazy, she has no idea what that means. She doesn't know which behavior she needs to change or what behavior she did I'm ascribing that label to, which we'll deem as negative. And so it's way more fruitful to, instead of saying, hey, Emily, stop being lazy, to say, hey, there are 3 things that you've done that I did not like. Instead of doing this, do this next time. And then when Emily does that next time, immediately trying to reinforce the behavior and say, great job, that was amazing, awesome, or whatever source of reinforcement is most positive for her, which we might find out Emily likes something else more. Who knows? Maybe she wants a call out in public, or maybe she wants a free lunch. I don't know. But when we do that, then it's like, okay, now I can create reward cycles around people so I can encourage the behavior that I want.
Do you believe the word energy is illy defined?
Sure. I mean,
how would you define energy, perhaps?
I wouldn't even try. I wouldn't even try. I mean, because like, if someone said, hey, so-and-so has good energy, right? I would probably say, okay, this person has done numerous behaviors in front of other people that they recognize a pattern with other people that they have had positive experiences with in the past. And so what are all of these behaviors that this person who has, quote, good energy has, that then I can take to somebody else who has bad energy and say, do this instead. And all of a sudden, this person now has good energy. But it's not that they have good energy. They have observables. Now, some people will be like, no, there's something else. It's like, nope, you have senses. You can observe through them. And that is what you are limited to, period. Show me anywhere that we've been able to prove that we have any other senses besides the one that we have our eyes, we have our ears, we have our touch. Like, we can listen, we can taste. Like, those are the senses we have. That's how we perceive the world. That's where we take in information. And so it's from those senses that we made a decision. And so we just have to deconstruct what were the variables that created that pattern that we recognized from the past that was positive. But this is how I feel, like fundamentally, this is how I think about learning any skill. and be like, you want to be a good speaker? It's like, look at good speakers, and you have to really look. It's not just like, he seems so confident. You can't describe that to yourself because you don't even know what it means. So like, but what is he doing? How, like, okay, he doesn't pace a lot on stage. He walks and then he stands on one side and he addresses one side and he stays there for a little bit, 10 seconds or so, and then he walks to the other side and he stands there for 10 seconds or so. Okay, so he does walk, but not always, because I walked and it looked like I was nervous. Okay, so I got to walk, but only sometimes. Got it. And then what's he doing with his hands? Okay, he doesn't have his hands in his pocket, but then he does put his hand in his pocket when he makes a point, but then he takes it out again. Okay, and so like as anal as that sounds, when you start doing it, people are like, whoa, what happened? You have totally different energy now. It's just, and the thing is I don't think that anyone does anything purposefully. They're not trying to miscommunicate. It's just that big amorphous words like energy, like vibe, like manifestation, whatever, are shorthand for bundles of terms and bundles of behaviors. And it's just much faster to say, she's confident, than saying she smiles when she walks in the door. She's, she talks, she speaks loudly. She enunciates. She nods her head when I'm talking to her. She repeats back to me what I said before saying what she's going to say. Like, rather than listing 30 things, we're like, she's confident. But being able to deconstruct that is what I think makes it valuable for you and for you to teach to other people if you are trying to do that.
I think I understand the framework around most words, but I guess, how about energy in the sense of, I have a lot of energy today?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Because that one is helpful for others, but
yeah.
I think back to...
Actually, this is a perfect example. Yeah. You said the word energy, and I just said what I think you're talking about,
exactly.
Right? And so this is how most people miscommunicate. And they try to learn when somebody's giving them 10 amorphous words like that in a row, and then they're like, why isn't it working? It's because there's so many things that are ill-defined.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, totally right. But on energy, how would you define like having a lot of energy? Because I think back to this, the first podcast I ever saw on you was Jack and Graham's a while back, when you originally went on My First Million, and Jack and Graham's around the same time. And you had this idea of like, fuck happiness, right? Yeah. And I kind of have a similar notion in my mind, like fuck energy, just kind of care about the results. Do you feel similarly about this?
I honestly haven't thought about my energy levels in a very long time. So
you just look at the outputs.
It's just not really a thought for me. I don't know. I just haven't really thought about it. Like if I'm a little tired, I'll take a stimulant. If I'm a lot of tired, I'll sleep. Like, I don't know. And if I'm no tired, I'll work. Like that's like, I don't know. Like, yeah, it's just, yeah, I really don't think about it at all.
That's interesting. Dr. K also mentioned to talk about pop sci with you a little.
Oh God.
Can you persuade someone to do something that goes against their identity?
Define identity.
I guess usually in the context of, I am a person who drinks lots of water. I'm a person who works out.
Can you get someone to do something different than they've done before in the past?
Yes.
Sure.
What would be your framework for going around that in perhaps a sales discussion?
Well, it's kind of like the temperature in the room. It's just how many variables can you control? I mean, if you think about, what's motivation, right? No one knows. But I can say that it's the equal opposite of deprivation, which is when you're very deprived, you are motivated, right? If you're deprived of money, feel deprived of money. It's a psychological construct. I want to get into that one. I'll use a simple one. Physiological. If you're deprived of food, you're hungry. You're motivated to get food when you haven't eaten in a while. You're motivated to sleep when you haven't slept in a while. Motivated to have sex when you haven't had sex in a while, right? You're deprived of that thing. And so if I wanted to motivate someone to behave in a way different than they normally do, I'd want to deprive them of something good in order to motivate the behavior, and make doing the thing that I want them to do the way of getting the thing that they want. And I think a lot of it just comes down to clearly communicating. And I would say, like, the longer I've been in the business of business, I have done away with a lot of the fanciness of marketing and sales. And it's about clear, not clever. How can I, as clearly as possible, communicate to this person? And I think having kind of the behaviorist view of the world has helped me be more nuanced in my communication, more specific with my language, which then makes it clearer for people. And then it increases the likelihood that they do the desired behavior because I was clear with my instructions.
If people are illogical in the buying process, why do we base offers in logic?
Well, the premise is that people are illogical. I don't think they're all logical. I think it depends on the nature of the purchase. The bigger the purchase, the more logical they are. The smaller the purchase, the quote less logical they are. And this, Daniel Kahneman made his whole Nobel Prize around this concept, which is thinking fast and slow. And so I think it depends on what you're selling. And so I think the original question was why have offers that are based in logic? But that assumes that someone's going to interpret everything logically, which they wouldn't anyways. Also, the more advanced the person that you're selling to, the more they already translate features into benefits, which is a fun one.
Tell me about that.
So if you're selling to a super advanced car buyer, you don't need to say, man, this McLaren, whatever, is going to make you feel vroom. Like you're talking to an advanced car buyer, they're like, tell me about the carburetor, tell me about like the engine, and tell me about the injector, and tell me I don't know anything about cars, but like whatever, like whatever those things are. Like if you're trying to, like for me, like I was thinking is like, what's something I know a lot about? Like I know a lot about gym equipment. Like I love gym equipment. I'm a gym equipment phenom. Or fiend rather. If someone's trying to sell me by like the feeling, that's not like, I'm like, show me the machine, show me the strength curve. Because I will then translate it in my mind into the benefits of what I'm going to get from it, because I already know what I'm going to do with it. And so the more advanced the person that you're selling to, the more you actually can talk about features, because they're doing the translation on their own and prefer the specificity of language. If you're talking to a beginner, then the rich guy who just wins the lottery, then talk to him about the vroom vroom of the McLaren and how the girls are going to love him. So I think it just depends again on the buyer. Now, to be fair, both of those people buy McLarens, and it's up to the salesperson to figure out which one they're selling to.
This might be kind of vague, but how do you...
That's all we've been doing.
Alex, I'll just say this, just an aside. You're an extremely hard person to craft questions for because of the way... No, it's a great thing. It's been a great exercise for me and my team, because I'm like, well, I already know how he defines this. We have to redefine this because he interprets it through this framework. So it's been a lot of how do we get you thinking into the future a bit, which I find really interesting. But how do you get what you want out of a negotiation?
Oh, this is an easy one. Don't need anything from the other person and have something that they want.
Don't get anything you need from the other person and have something they want.
Basically, if you have something that someone else wants and they have nothing that you want, you have all the cards. And so a lot of people think about like, what are the tactics in negotiation? Like, should you log roll? Should you, should you anchor high? Like, I think all of those things are valuable in increment, but the order of magnitude improvements in negotiations happen from supply and demand. And I think that it is like the two laws of business that I put on the pedestal, which is why the whole logo of acquisition.com is based on it, is you've got supply and demand and you've got leverage. That's a fulcrum for leverage. And so those two are just, those are everything. Those are everything. Like everything, in my opinion, just spills from those two kind of laws, is getting as much as you possibly can for what you put in and supply and demand. And so in a negotiation, both of you guys have demand, but it's just like, who has more? And so if, we can run through 100 examples, but like, let's say you have an employee negotiation for a contract in terms of their employment. If you need their skill in order to create lots and lots of value in the business, and there's no one else who does that thing, they have leverage. They have the supply and demand, and that conversation is supply is one, and demand is lots of people besides me. Now, if I'm the only person who happens to have a desire for that specific skill set, which would be a really weird scenario, but let's say that, then it's like, then you're truly in like a head-to-head, like they need you and you need them, and how are we going to do it? Which is really just a game of chicken. Again, but it's a game of chicken, and that game of chicken is still predicated on who needs the other person less. Like who could live after they cut their arm off more, right? Who could live better? And so, so many things are sales or so many things are negotiations, depending on how you define it. But like, if you're in the dating market, if there's way more girls who want to be with me than there are guys like me, then I will be able to dictate terms. I'll be like, these are the terms under which I want to enter a relationship. Now, if I'm going after a girl who's also, let's just say, high status or in high demand, then that evens out the terms more, right? But it's just like all of these things are just on these mountaintops, and you just continue to go up in levels of what's the demand for this person on both sides. And if the demand for one person's greater, then that person will be able to dictate the terms more favorably. But I think all of the negotiations are won before you sit down at the table. Like it's kind of like all the way back to the beginning. It's like, you don't play games you can't win. It's like, I don't want to sit down at a negotiation table when I don't have cards. I just won't sit down. Why bother? I'm either going to get a deal I hate or I'm not going to get a deal. Why bother? Just fix the conditions and then sit down. So like, how do you get a girl when you're overweight, you're not funny, you're not successful, you're whatever? It's like, you could spend time to try and figure that out, or you could just lose weight and figure out a skill that you can monetize, and then you won't have to. It's kind of like the Neo in the Matrix, where, I mean, it's one of my favorite movies of all time, but like when he's saying, so are you saying that I'm so fast I can dodge bullets? And he says, I'm saying that when you're ready, you won't have to. And I think it's the same idea. It's just like, when you're ready to sit down at the negotiation table, you won't have to dodge bullets. You won't have to do the dance. You'll just say, this is what I want. These are the terms under which I would do the deal. If you accept those terms, we can do it. If not, fine. I'll just go to the next person because I have more demand.
Do you believe success is the best revenge?
My ninth grade tennis coach, who was also this gigantic Jack dude, who ended up always staying after school with me and working out with me, like taught me how to lift weights. He told me that when I was like a really, angsty teenager, when I was like, I'm going to get back with these guys. He's like, no, you're not. He's like, no, you're not. He said, if you came back at a 10-year reunion and you told them, like, look at me, he said, you would look like the biggest loser in the world. But in your 15-year-old mind, you're like, it's going to be awesome. But when you play it out, it's like, no, it actually isn't awesome. Like, the only way that you can really, quote, get back is that you would, win so big that you would shrink them into irrelevance. And so I think like the real behind the success is the only revenge is that you just don't really think about them anymore. It's just not really a thing. Because if I actually thought about somebody every day, they won. Like, they won. And so I balance, or I hedge that against, if you want something out of life, then I am willing to burn whatever fuel I've got. And so I think a lot of people, so there's this boat, this seems like a non sequitur, but I'll wrap it around. There's this boat that I remember seeing in a harbor once, and it said, don't analyze your pleasures. And I thought that was a really interesting name for a boat, first off, but it was a really interesting phrase. And so I thought about that and I was like, well, don't analyze your fuel. Because I think a lot of people are, some people want to have passion, but like, passion I think is very fleeting. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of overhead in doing the things that you want to do. If you want to get in shape, there's plenty of days you don't want to work out. Plenty of days you'd rather just eat cookies. Like, there's overhead, right? There's things that you don't want to do, even if you like fitness. But if you need to use revenge as your fuel to become successful, which you want, then use it. And so if you don't have any of the positive, emotions, if you want to call it that, then use the negative ones, and then maybe we'll get to a point where you can use some positive ones. Because I remember I went to a performance coach years and years ago. It didn't last long, but I said, I feel like I have fuel. I said, but I feel like it burns dirty. Like, I feel like I can accomplish whatever I want. I was like, but I don't like the fuel that I use to get there. And she didn't really have a good answer for me, but that's why it didn't last very long. But even going through the process of asking the question made me think about it. And I was like, why do I say it burns dirty? Like, what about it does it affect in my life? And then I was like, well, is there a way that I can do the same behaviors I do when I'm, quote, angry about something when I'm not angry? And then over time, I was like, well, then I can just get rewarded from the activities and shift away from kind of the original catalyst for beginning the behavior set. And so I think there is some sort of kind of inertia that you have to overcome in the beginning. And that's why I recommend to people, just use whatever you got. If you're ashamed, use that. If you're scared, use that. If you're anxious, use that. If you're angry, use that. Use whatever you have. But if doing it over time isn't getting what you want, then change so that you can get more of what you want. The difficulty that I think some people have with my content is that I really have no judgment. So I don't pretend to have a moral high ground. I don't have, I'm just not going to judge someone on what they do. Like, if that's what works for you, do it. If that's what's getting what you want out of life, amazing. I mean, for me, I would say like my secular views are, try not to impact other people negatively. But beyond that, if you want to eat bubblegum and watch, and I don't know why you eat bubblegum, but that's what you want to do, right? And you want to watch Netflix all day and play video games, then like, great. Like, it's just like, some people are like, why could you say that? It was like, how could I say that? How am I going to project my desires on somebody else? If they want to do that, then they can do that. And they can do that. And here's the thing is that you don't have to do it forever. You can do it as long as it serves you. And if something else serves you differently, because I mean, I get attacked sometimes. They're like, what he's doing is not sustainable. If there's a day where I don't want to do what I'm doing anymore, I'll stop, or I'll just shift. I'll do less. It's like we have this idea that anything that someone does is forever and always. And the only thing that's guaranteed is that it won't be forever. And it's certainly not always. And so it's just like we make these projections of other people that we fictionalize them. We create these straw men that we attack. And they're just not real. And so at the same time, that's a great way of overcoming kind of the multitude of hate you get when you just, expose yourself to millions and millions of people. Is like, they're not attacking me. They're attacking an idea that they have in their head of somebody else that I remind them of. And that's okay.
So at the end of the day, it really just comes down to if the belief is useful. I hate to use the word motivation, but
sure.
At this point in your life, Alex,
Yeah.
What motivates you, pain or pleasure?
Neither. I do what I've been rewarded for doing in the past. And I think the heart of the question is, why do you do what you do? Why do you still do what you do? Why do you still quote work so hard? I'll give an answer that people will not like, but I took a year off in 2021 and basically didn't work. And what's interesting about that year is that it was one of the most depressed years of my life. But looking back on the year, so I remember it differently than I experienced it. And so the thing with memory is that it's tricky because it doesn't actually like work like a computer. You selectively remember the good things and you don't remember the bad. And so what's interesting about reward and punishment is that punishment fades, reward sticks. So for example, like the reason that the morning after you're hungover, you're like, I'm never going to drink again. And then 7 days later, you're out of the bars and drinking again. It's because the punishment of the drinking fades, but the reward stays the same. And it works across everything. So the reason that you break up with a girlfriend and then a few months later you're like missing her is because the reward is still there. And the pain associated with the person fades. And so this is why like some people like so many long and continue these cycles of getting back together and breaking up, getting back together and breaking up, is because one of these sticks and the other one basically renews and then disappears, and then renews and disappears. And so if you want to continually punish someone, on the flip side, you have to vary the intensity and style of punishment so that it stays novel. Otherwise they habituate. Weird, right? And so to go back to the original question, was like, why do you do what you do? I don't think anyone can really answer the question in general. I think people can create a narrative. Like I could tell you a story, my dad didn't hug me enough, or there's this big pie in the sky thing that I really want to accomplish and I think humanity needs it. Like these are all really compelling narratives and they've been repeated a lot of times. I think they're just answers to questions. I don't know if they're actually reality. And so when I think about that, it's like, I behave this way because I've been rewarded for behaving this way. And to close the loop on that year that I took off, I have had days that I have good days and I have days that I have bad days. And I have suffered during the year that I was off, and I have suffered during the years that I work a lot. And so my objective experience hasn't really dramatically changed year to year. I think it's slightly improved, more so because of my basically just skills have improved in terms of like how I can reframe reality. That's gotten a lot better. But by and large, like if all of our experience is how we choose to perceive the world, then like it's all in our heads anyways. And so it's like really just trying to flex that muscle more over time. And so why do I do what I do now? Because what else would I do? And if I did something different, I'd probably enjoy it about the same anyways. And so it's like, I would say that right now I seek stimulation probably above everything else. And so there's few things that stimulate me more than the work that I do. I have a note on my wall of like the 3 activities that I enjoy most in life, which I think is a really good activity for anybody. 2 activities that I've done lately the first one I've done for a long time, but the second one I did lately. The first one was, I had this boss. I've told this story before, but it was meaningful for me. So I had this boss, first boss, second boss. Well, first adult boss I had. And I had some good weekend. And I came back and she was like, you seem happy. And she said, you must have had a good weekend. And I was like, yeah, Yeah, I did. And she said, I'm pretty sure the secret to happiness is living as many days in a row like that as you can. And it was actually a pretty operationalized definition for me. I was like, I can do that. Like, what is one day that I like? How do I live that day as many times in a row as I can? And that's actually been a pretty, like, probably the most operationalized way of trying to live my life that I still do to this day. And the thing is that I think that day can change. And so what are the components of that day? And I'll bet you the things that I wanted to do as my perfect day when I was 20 are different than what they are at 36, and they'll be different when I'm at 56. And so doing that exercise of what is the perfect day for me now, and then how can I maximize the likelihood that I live that day over and over and over again? And I think that has been a really, really powerful recipe for me for, quote, happiness. The second frame that's been really helpful for me in terms of reframing suffering has been a couple things. But I'll give you two frames. One is when things are really good in business, I'm typically suffering because growth pains are painful. If things are plateauing, I'm usually suffering because plateaus are painful because you don't know, like, why are we stagnating? What's going on? And if you're declining, it's really painful. And so it's just like life is painful. And so pain in of itself is not an indication that there's something wrong. Suffering is not an indication that there's something wrong. It's just feedback. It's a signal. And so that's been helpful for me. The second is I actually ranked my basically all my adult years. So I say post-college, all the years that I've lived. I actually just force ranked them. I was like, what was my best year objectively? And so what's interesting is that I have a really good upward curve, but I definitely have local minimums. And so like 2025 for me, I think is a local minimum. It's probably been the worst year I've had. I think in the last, I could look it up, but I think it's about the last 7 or 8 years, probably the worst year I've had so far. Yeah. But and 2024 is my best year of all time. So really, really, but here's where it's interesting, is that this, 2025 so far has been the worst year of the last 8 years, but the 5th worst of the last 13. And so even though it's what feels like a terrible year for me now, it's still way better than 2013 was. And it's way better than 2016. Those were terrible years. And when I look at them objectively, I kind of laugh like the way I am right now. I'm like, yeah, those are bad. Right? And so it's like, it's weird because I could almost like derive joy from like, this is bad, but it's not as bad as it has been. And so I'm like, well, obviously I'll survive. And so the idea of like, man, I can't stand it anymore. Well, it's like, well, you can stand it or you'll die. And if you die, you won't have to. And so the default of all humans is standing it until you don't have to, which I think makes suffering easier to deal with. But I think one of the greatest sources of suffering is thinking that suffering is a problem. It's that there's something wrong with you for suffering. And the same thing applies to, anxiety. Like, man, why am I anxious? Why am I stressed? It's like, you're alive. That's all that means. Because in all settings, you're going to have stress. In good settings, you have growth stress, you have stagnation stress, you have decline stress. All of them suck. But you also have good things at all of those times. So life is life.
Okay, I was going to ask about the metrics you use to decide. What metrics do you use to decide if you've had a good year?
So there's probably like a quantitative and a qualitative. Quantitatively, it's just like, what progress did we make, in the business, and then any other relevant accomplishments. Like, did I publish a book? That's cool. Did we make any acquisitions that were meaningful? That's cool. Did we grow any of those companies? That's cool or interesting. Those would be just kind of like the quantitative side. From a qualitative perspective, I would say I would look back on the year and be like, how many days did I live the type of day that I want to live? And there are moments where I'm like, I am sad. I would prefer to not be this way. What can I change about my conditions to decrease the likelihood that I feel this way? And like February was a horrible month for me this year. And so I was like, okay, I should change something. And so that's what I set out to do. I was like, I'm going to change things. And I will say April has been better than March and is better than February.
Circumstantially, can you speak to the things about February, perhaps? And what
like,
variables you changed?
Yeah. Well, it's just, so I had, at the beginning of the year, I had 8 lawsuits that were ongoing, which is a huge mental drain. I was able to resolve 5 of them in February, which is great. So that was a huge kind of load off. There were some health things that we were dealing with. So had to deal with those. Those are, again, like, they're like unforced errors of life. It's like these things occur. And I had this really pithy quote that I texted to a friend of mine, which is life doesn't fight fair. And so I think it's just like a really interesting reminder for me when like bad things happen. I'm like, oh yeah, like, because people want to be like, that's not fair. It's like, well, life doesn't fight fair. Like, we have this demand of the universe that it fight fair. It's not going to fight fair. And so in thinking about that, it's like just a good reminder. But yeah, it was just a confluence of just many, many negative things. Some of them business related, some of them not business related. And, we were growing really fast at acquisition.com. And so there's huge constraints in the business in terms of talent. And so it's just lots of people, very spread thin, and trying to, handle any kind of interpersonal things that come up from that. And also while maintaining, like, because I'm spread thin too, but also being encouraged, like being spread thin, and then also being a positive force to the greatest degree possible within the company, and showing up that way for the team. So it's just draining. That's all. Just very draining.
From interviewing a lot of successful entrepreneurs and content creators like yourself, I've noticed a lot of them are in pretty good shape, and I think it's because they have a reward system based on taking action rather than thinking. Would you consider yourself someone who overthinks?
No.
What practical steps do you take to reverse negative thoughts?
Well, I would say first step is, why is it negative?
Yeah.
Like, why am I judging this thought? And that usually diffuses 99% of them. But if it's a thought that I don't think serves me, then I'd be like, is there a thought that's alternative to this? Is there a reality in which this thought could be a good thought? So it's reframing the thought. Then there's the frame of the veteran, which is, if this bad thing happened 1,000 times in a row, I still think it's bad, which is habituation. And so I think it's just useful to have like multiple cards you can flip through. Like a fourth frame that I'll go through is like, okay, well, I'm a slightly advanced ape on a little blue marble, and in 3 generations, everyone who knows me will be dead. And this problem is probably not going to be meaningful. And so it's just like, how many different, reframes do I need in order to make this irrelevant? But I think cosmic irrelevance is probably the most powerful one that I shift to most frequently, which is just like, oh, right, we're, orbiting the sun, which is orbiting a galaxy, which is orbiting another thing. And I'm like, okay, this doesn't matter. Like, by the time the sun, like the light from the other galaxy comes to us, it's like, I will be dead many times over. That's just for the time for the light to get here. And so just like, it just minimizes a lot of the quote negative thoughts. But, I get asked a lot of questions, and I get invited on podcasts like this. Like, I have, some sort of answer. And I've just had, like, I think if we're being like super real, like if we're dropping all the pretenses, like I get invited onto these things because I make a lot of money and I have a lot of followers. Like, if we're like just being real. And so it's like these two skills, which is like how to make videos and how to make a profit, sometimes related, sometimes not, are the reason that I get invited and then ask questions around life, which I find just kind of interesting. But fundamentally, I think that so few people know anything about anything that has been kind of my ultimate stress reliever, which is like, oh, I don't know. I'm like, oh, well, no one else does either. And that's just like, and I think there's some people who have like natural predispositions, because I do think there's something to say with like mental chemistry and things like that, because I'll give you my logical reasoning around that, like nature versus nurture. Like, there are wolves and there are golden retrievers and there are golden doodles, right? And all they did was they just found the nice wolves and they kept breeding the nice wolves until eventually they had dogs, right? And then they bred the nicest, cutest ones to make, perma puppies or whatever. And so if I think about 8 billion humans, I'm sure there are some lines that are perma puppies that exist that are just pretty much always happy, that are just golden retrievers, that just are that way. And I think that there are also some lines that are just Dobermans, and there are some pit bulls that are there. And I think that you can try to take a pit bull and get it to be a couple order, the happiest pit bull, but it's probably never going to be happier than a golden doodle, even the worst golden doodles. And so I do think that there are bands of kind of change that are possible. So it's like, wait, doesn't this conflict with the nature nurture thing? Sort of, but the thing is like, I can't control that. And it's also not useful it's like, maybe I actually have golden doodle genes and I've just been living, in the life that I have. Maybe I'm just an unexpressed golden doodle. That's what this comes down to. I'm not just a Doberman. But the question is, does it serve me? So I believe that about the world, but in thinking that I'm preordained to a certain set of believing doesn't serve me. So it's like, okay, well, what are the things that are in my control, my behaviors, and then I'm going to try and adjust those things, to maximize the likelihood that things that I want to have happen do happen. Anyways, to circle back to the original thought around this, I have basically spent the vast majority of my life trying to achieve things that I thought would be really cool. And I realized about myself that I am not the person who wants to be the richest man in the world. I'm not the person who wants to be the most jacked person in the world. But I do have goals that are just significantly higher than most people's, but not the highest. Like I got to 250 pounds, like much bigger than I am now. And I was like, this is enough. This is a little too much. And most people who are in that game just always want more. And I was like, no, this is enough. And from a money perspective, like I'm pretty close to there. Like this is enough. Like I don't need more than $1 billion or $2, right? And that seems absurd to say, and I recognize that. But I don't need 100, right? That's like, now maybe we'll continue to grow and we'll continue to do things beyond that. But like, I know when I feel like I can recognize when enough is enough. And then you can unplug and then all the pieces of the board change, because then you're like, okay, well, what are my new objectives? And so I for sure see a world where at 45, 10 years from now, I'll probably get super into longevity and things like that. I could see that happening. But for right now, my life has been more or less just setting goals and then trying to make the days that I have to live in order to achieve them as enjoyable as possible. And I said at the 10, 15 minutes ago, that I have 3 things on my board for what makes a great day. And so for me right now, a great day is a day that I work out with someone that I like. It's I eat with people that I like, and I build something. If I do those 3 things, at the end of the day, I will have earned my shower. And I kind of think like that. Like I always want to leave nothing on the field. And those are the days that I enjoy the most, when I have nothing left to give. And so in seeing that and knowing that that is the kind of the pattern of good days, then I try to work as hard as I can, because I know that those, at the end of those days, are the days that I enjoy the most. And so for some people, they don't like working like that, and their ideal day looks different than mine does. And I would say, then great, live that day. This isn't me saying live my way. My favorite way of saying this is like, my life is not a sermon. It is a documentary.
I want to go back to something you said about longevity. You said on what timeline you might be interested in that? 5 to 10 years or 20?
Yeah, probably 5 or 10. I'm already taking some steps now.
Would you want to live forever?
I don't know. I go back and forth on that one. I would say like, okay, if I could be a vampire without all the demonic components of it, just like live forever, super speed, all that stuff, stay the same age, not be in pain. Yeah. In. But if I could just like be a, 200-year-old, as what I would imagine a decrepit 200-year-old is, I don't know if I want that. Right. And so I think it really depends on under what conditions do I live forever? And do I know that I can live forever? So there's a variety of questions that I would have to follow up of, do I want to live forever or not? If it's like within a body that's maybe my 25-year-old body that doesn't have as much joint pain, I would probably, if I had to make the choice, I would probably do it. But it's definitely still a hard call, because as long as I would think, like, as long as you could choose to opt out at some point, I think that I'd be down. But like, you're Superman and you cannot die forever, that's an interesting take, because anybody who's made that decision is also making the decision from only like 50 or 60 years. And we like to hypothesize about what it'd like to be 1,000 years old, but no one's been 1,000 years old. And so, I mean, and also, is everyone else living forever? Because that would certainly change.
Yeah, that's hell.
Right. Watching
all of your family members die over and over again.
Yeah, that would be pretty bad. And so again, it's like, under what conditions? And so I think my answer would be, it depends.
What are the 5 business strategies that actually work? At what point does brand become higher leverage than these?
Yeah. So, all these almost ladder up to the value equation, which is you have latency, so you have speed, right? You have ease. So how easy can we make? How can we remove friction? There's perceived likelihood of achievement, which is you could ladder to consistency. How can we make this risk-free? I say reliability, also kind of like, same. The, impact itself, like can we make the impact more meaningful to a customer? Like these are all kind of like the components of value. But it's not that, so brand only really influences one of those, which is just the perceived likelihood of achievement. So people will buy a brand because they've been rewarded from that brand in the past. And then the product will reinforce the cycle of the brand or deteriorate it. And so there's a lot of concepts in like the creator world where it's like, jab, jab, dab, right hook, or, give, ask, whatever you want to call it. That is true if the products you have are not great. Because
I actually agree with that.
Giving, and then it's a take when you sell the thing. But no one's like, oh my God, Apple, let's say Apple 10 years ago, is coming out with a new product. No one was like, oh, they're right hooking us now. Everyone was lining up because they were excited to buy the product because all the products are great. And so so like if you've read any Steve Jobs stuff, it's like he actually saw the same deposits of goodwill, but he just saw it through the product itself. It's like, we can deposit goodwill because of how good our products are. And we have some bad products, which we obviously try not to make bad products. But if we do have a product that was a flop, we messed up something. Then he saw that as like the give take, which really just ladders up to just always reward your customers at all interactions, period. And so, and if you have consistently rewarded someone, then they will have less friction and they will buy faster and they'll be willing to buy at a higher price than to something that's unknown, which is why you're able to command a premium price. And so, how does brand, overcome those things? It doesn't. It just factors into risk. And people love buying things that are risk-free. And if you've gone to Chipotle 100 times and you like it, then you'll go again. And let's say the first time you ever go to Chipotle, you get a bad bowl, but you don't know it's a bad bowl because you've never had Chipotle before, then maybe you'll never go to Chipotle again. But if you've had 20 good bowls and you have one bad bowl, they've probably bought enough goodwill from you to get a 21st bowl, right? And so there's the content that you make that on its own will reward people for giving you something, which is their time, and you give them some sort of benefit for doing it. Jimmy does it by continuing to entertain people, and we do it by trying to educate business owners. But everyone, as long as the person that you're trying to attract gets what they want out of it, then it's a win. And ideally, when you provide the service or product that you spend all that time on, they buy it and they tell their friends. And then they don't see it as a negative brand experience. They buy and then they buy the next thing. And so I don't think that brand overcomes those things or sits separately. It actually just is a high lever on the risk.
So you would say that the jab isn't even necessary. It can just be right hooks.
Or rather, right hook would just be all taking. So no, it'd be the other way. So it'd be all jabs, no right hooks. It'd be all gives, and then you just get.
So you used to position your videos way back as I have nothing to sell you.
Yeah.
Do you think school would have had such a successful marketing campaign if you had said at the beginning of all those videos, Alex Hormozi, the co-owner of School, if you want it, it's link in description, and then just did the same video?
Maybe, I don't know.
Like I found School particularly effective because it was like, oh, this guy hasn't really sold anything to people, and like I'm not a portfolio company that he'd want to invest in, so he's just been giving me value. Yeah. Oh, what's the School thing? It's finally the thing he's pushed. Let me get this.
Yeah.
So do you think there's any merit to that, or is congruency probably the better strategy?
Well, okay. So you said, so there was two questions there. So one is, would the School launch have worked as well if I had presented other stuff before that?
That could work. Yeah.
Maybe if the other stuff that I presented was good. In terms of the congruency piece, I had a huge percentage of my audience that wanted to start businesses. I'm not going to help gazillions. I don't want to build that business. But School is a platform that can do it for zillions of people at once. And so I spent 4 years looking for something that I thought was the best product on the market, and school is the best product on the market in that category. And so that's why I was like, okay, I feel good putting my name behind this. Because I also invest and buy companies that I don't put my name on, not because I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but just it doesn't appeal to a huge percentage. If I buy a teeth whitening chain, there's no point in me pushing my teeth whitening chain. Just like if you're in one of these 32 markets that like, it just like, why?
What's a sentence someone said that broke you?
I don't think there has been a sentence that's broken me. I'm still here. So like things that like bothered me.
I would say so.
What is a sentence that bothered me? Actually, you know what? There was a term that bothered me. It was one of the catalysts that got me into entrepreneurship, which is I was reading this self-help book when I was on my self-help kick to try and, figure out what I want to do with my life when I was 20 or 21. And it said a lot of people are entrepreneurs. And it was like people who just like reading and talking about business stuff, but don't actually do any business. And I was like, fuck. It's like, that's me. And I was like, I don't want to be an entrepreneur. Like, that sucks. And so I was like, okay, well, I should change that. I think the things that really, quote, break us are, they don't break you. They just make you aware of a deficiency that you've been ignoring. You're not bothered by things that aren't true. You're bothered by things that are, that you don't like to look at.
On a lighter note, if business didn't work out, you said your plan B was to drive Uber and strip.
Yeah.
What would your stripper name have been?
I don't know. No idea. Maybe something exotic.
I thought that was a funny one in the research. I forgot about that story.
Well, I think what's interesting is that your plan B continues to improve over time. And so basically as you develop skills, and so like all I had, at that point was I had energy and I was in shape and I was decently good looking. And so I was like, I will bet that someone will let me dance on some stage if I learned how to do that. And I could drive Uber during the day. So that would give me, I'd be able to earn 16 hours a day and probably earn pretty good money. And then but the plan was never to do that forever. The plan would be to do that, save the money, and then take another shot. And so, I see that as a short-term speed bump on the way to where I'm trying to go. And again, I come from this perspective of like, I don't judge people for how they make their money. If you do what you want, if it doesn't bother you and it bothers someone, like you can boil down most of the trolls on the internet into one statement, which actually helped me a lot too, which was, you make money in a way I would prefer you didn't. Like, you do not live according to my preferences. Okay. And you don't live according to mine. And that's okay. That's why you have your life and I have mine. And so I think it's useful to have these translations because then it just kind of like makes a lot of the, like many or most of these comments just boil down to like, he does things that I would prefer he didn't do. I'm like, okay.
Do you think plan Bs are mostly unproductive?
No. So, there's, it's really interesting because there's on so many entrepreneurial things, you can like, it feels like you can't have a middle take. Or like, how do you feel about morning routines? You either got to be like, oh, if you have to have a morning routine, you have to, do your dunks and your affirmations, and like you got to sharpen the axe before you cut the tree. And then there's the other people who are like, there's zero routine. Like you just have to start working as soon as possible. I tend to be more in this camp, right? But it doesn't make viral clips unless you're polar on the belief. So like, are you plan B? No, you have to only have plan A and go all in on plan A. And if you're not all in, then there's no plan Bs, right? On the other hand, you can just make the argument that having a plan B allows you to go all in on plan A because you're not being irresponsible, right? Like I think me getting over the hump, like I don't think me having a plan B made me less successful. I think it just made me logical. Now, so said differently, when I see many people really aggressively arguing on both sides of something, to me, it means the thing doesn't matter at all. So like, should you have a plan B? Should you not have a plan B? Well, if people have succeeded with a plan B and without a plan B, then it probably just doesn't matter. And if people have succeeded with a morning routine without a morning routine, then morning routines probably don't matter. And so there's just so few actual variables that contribute to the outcome that everything else just appeals to mysticism, as I think. It's just magic. right? It's like, okay, there's this other ephemeral, this is why I don't like the manifestation energy, whatever. And then to be fair, there's like all the people who are like, you have to manifest your life. And then there's plenty of people who are like, no, you don't. And so I tend to lean towards the zero, meaning if it can work without it, then we don't need it. So I tend to be a deleter by nature. So like, what can I remove from my life? Because I think it's a more effective practice to think, what are the few things I enjoy? And then to improve my life, remove all things that are not those, rather than try and add things, it's a very American or Westernized thinking, which is that we think to improve our lives, we need to add stuff. Whereas from the Eastern philosophy, to improve your life, you remove things. You simplify. And I think I subscribe more to that.
I think that's good for giving advice too, because so many times people are giving advice to each other and it's always about adding something, but it's more, the more helpful advice is usually what can you take away in this situation to be more effective?
You only have so many hours. There's, what was it? There's a really interesting, like if you did all of the practices that are recommended by some health association, just like the government, you did all of them. It's like, you have to walk this amount of time. You have to do this. Like there are more hours. You do not have enough hours in the day to do every health recommendation to prevent every one of the ailments that can occur in your life, which just means you're going to die. and like oxygen kills you one breath at a time, because we are all rusting eventually. Like basically you're born and then you rust until you die, just biologically speaking. You literally oxidize, you rust. And so it's just like we try and do these things to like stop one of the 100 things that could kill us. And it's like, fine, maybe we stop that one, but just another one will kill you. And so a lot of this just comes down to trying to fight off death. And so I think about death a lot, and I think that grounds me in life.
I spent some time with Bryan Johnson, and it was really interesting watching how...
He's a really nice guy.
Yeah, I thought so. I really liked... I like how much conviction he has about the things he does, because he kind of, like you, people judge for Alex working too hard, Bryan.
He doesn't live in a way that they would prefer.
Yeah, exactly. But he seems much happier spiritually, mentally, physically. Observing his life, I don't know if you've got to see it closely. Is that the kind of route you're going with the longevity stuff?
I don't know. I think when I get there, I'll make the decisions that are worth it for me. There's not I do a lot of things that already are. Like, I have been resistance training for 20 years. I probably am very heart healthy. Despite the fact that I live in what most people would consider a high stress life, I would say that most people, my team can tell me, I would say that most people probably wouldn't consider me a very stressed person. I have good days and bad days like anyone, but like, I don't really think I operate on a super high level of stress. And so there's, like from an eating perspective, I eat the same things every day. So like, I do a lot of these things without, like the 80-20 I kind of already do. And so the question is just what the diminishing return is of the other 20.
How do you define stress?
Great question. I might have written it down, so I'll give you a better answer. This is why the book is so useful. I write things down so I don't have to remember them. Which is there's a great meme where it's like the John Cena meme where he's like can't believe it. It's like I write things down so I won't have to remember them, and it's like I write things down so that I can remember them. It's like, wait, what? Let's see if I can find it here. Yeah. So I observe anxiety occurring when there are many choices and unclear priorities. Basically, there's conflict. Because if you think about, like, what is a decision, right? A decision is that you cut off options, right? The opposite of having to make a decision is making a commitment, which is the elimination of alternatives. And so there is significantly like if you replay the game, the levels of a video game, and you already know how to beat all the first 4 levels, you have very little anxiety because you know exactly what you need to do. And so I think that anxiety comes up when you don't know what to do. And you typically don't know what to do when you have too many options and not enough priorities.
The other successful people that you've spent time with, have you noticed that any of them have proclivities toward stress?
Sure. Leila's super stressed. And she's very successful.
Given that you two have done similar amounts of volume, is it really just the areas that she's inexperienced with, or has done less volume that she's stressed about? Or
I think she's like, this is kind of like the Doberman versus whatever scenario. I think she has, for whatever reason, a more natural proclivity towards anxiety. I have one that's more tends towards anger. I don't see that as good. I don't see it as bad, just as it is what it is. And I think we've both used, don't overanalyze your pleasure, don't overanalyze your fuel. There have been many times that her anxiety has served her, right? She uses that kind of like frenetic energy and she just channels it towards getting things done. And I probably do the same thing just from an anger perspective. And so this is why I think that we I think it's more helpful to not feel like you are beholden or that you are broken, if there's something wrong with you for experiencing human emotions. I think it's just, what do you get from them? Because if you can have a negative emotion and make something positive from it, was it a negative emotion?
I guess I just can't see the reward people would get from being anxious.
Well, I think it's, they get what they want using their anxiety. Like if you're running a race and you're nervous about the race, you're anxious, and then you win the race, did you get something from it? Probably. If that anxiety causes you to prepare more for a speech and then you crush the speech, did you get something from it? Probably. So I think people will continue to stay anxious. They continue to stay angry as long as those things serve them.
On you and Leila, you had, when your relationship started, it kind of was the priority of business than marriage.
Sure.
And you kind of shifted that to marriage over business.
December 19.
Do you think, should business come before your marriage? Were those 3 years necessary to evolve past that, or would you have found more success in that stage had you done that from the beginning?
No idea. Can't replay the game. I know that at that time, it was kind of one of those recalibration moments, same as like February. I was like, this is bad. I want to change this. Or rather, my days are not as I would prefer them to be. I would like to change them. And I feel like there are structural problems, so we should change it. And in December of 19, we had a conversation just I remember we went out on our balcony and I was like, I do not like the way that we're living. And she was like, I don't either. And I was like, cool, so let's change. And that was it. We both agreed. We were both in the same. And the one thing that Leila and I have had that's been, call it exceptional luck or whatever you want to call it, is that we've always been on the same page. And it feels like luck in the moment. It feels fortunate. Because I go into the conversations and I'm like, I don't know where this is going to go. Because if she comes back and she's like, I love the way things are, I'd be like, that is a problem. Like, I don't want to keep doing this. And so we've thankfully been on the same page. And I think one of the benefits of living our lives so mutually entwined is that we are exposed to the same stimuli. And so we suffer at the same time, typically. And so if one of us is feeling off, the other one typically feels it. And like, it's wild. Like Leila and I have a very interesting relationship from a partnership perspective, because like there are few humans, I think, that have spent like, especially married couples, that have spent more time than Leila and I have together. Like from the time we met, we spent 2 weekends apart. Like the time we met, well, sorry, excluding the time when I flew out to do the launches. So that was like a 3-week period. But excluding that, from the day we met until now, there's 2 other weekends that we haven't been together. 2. Which is wild considering how much we travel and all that stuff. Like there hasn't been that much time. And so, and we also spend like, we're in the same building every day working. We see each other, throughout the day. And for a big chunk of those years, we were remote, so we were at home. And so I think it's like the average married couple ends up spending like 4 or 5 quality hours together a week. Something like that, where they're like not eating, not like dealing with kids, not watching television. Like there's really not that many hours that they're spending. And so we have something like, I don't know, like 20 or like we have the equivalent of like a 70-year marriage in terms of like time that we've spent together, time on marriage. And yeah, I think if I lost Leila, it would be really bad for me. It'd be very hard for me. So I would prefer not to lose her.
Do you actively have to iterate on the relationship in terms of how do we make this better?
Yeah.
It's a dichotomy to be managed, you've said in the past, but
Yeah.
what have been some things that you found out recently that could be useful to other married couples?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a dichotomy to be managed. I think the thing that has to get managed the most is closeness. And I think that that's one that I don't hear talked about enough. I think Esther Perel talks a little bit about this. She has a book called Mating in Captivity, which I haven't read, but Leila did and told me the story, which is how I read all my relationship books I've read in that way. And basically the single premise is that in modern society, people spend too much time together, but not in the right ways. And so this might sound like it's contradicting what I just said, but it's creating space to be missed. And so especially in a world where like both people work from home, like they're, together all day, it's like they become siblings, they become like roommates. They don't like have that mystery. They don't have that chemistry from a romantic perspective. And so because Leila and I can naturally spend so much time together if we so chose, what we manage typically is creating enough distance during the day, and even week to week sometimes, to create enough space to be drawn together. And I think that like if you've ever, I'm sure you have, and many people probably have, like if you've been away from somebody that you care about for a week or two, when you come back, you're like, oh my God, it's so nice to see them. It's like, how do we recreate that on a consistent basis? And so I think trying to actively push the other person away, not in an emotional way, but like physical space, is something that I would say that has been helpful for us, and not making that a bad thing. So there's a difference between wanting to be alone and not wanting to be with someone else. And I think being able to delineate that, like being able to even have that conversation up front and be like, hey, I'm going to take 3 hours and just like listen to this book, or I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to go work out, or I'm going to go do whatever. I think creating the permission where this is not a thing. This isn't me being upset with you. This is not that I don't love you. This is not that I don't want to be with you. This is like, I just need some me time. And being able to kind of give each other the space to do that, I think has been super valuable. Because sometimes you're like, I worked all day, and then you're not like, oh, I want to be married right now. You're like, I want to just decompress for a minute. And then we can go, I'll be like, emotionally ready to do whatever we want to do or talk about. And I think just having that, like making it okay to not hang out all the time is, and I think that's, it's like, if there's been something that's helped Leila and I, that's probably like one of the biggest ones.
When I spoke to Leila last when I was here, I'd asked her, what's something you noticed about Alex that he doesn't realize about himself? And she wouldn't speak to it because it was your frame. But what is something that Leila helped you realize?
It was my frame? What do you mean?
Or it was, she was like, I won't speak to what Alex would say.
Oh, okay, heard.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what is something that Leila helped you realize about yourself?
Yeah, understood. What did she help me realize about myself?
Or what's something she noticed that not a lot of other people had noticed about you?
I don't know. I would say that she's helped me develop in a lot of ways. But in terms of like things that I didn't notice about me, I think Leila, because she sees the world the same way that I do, from the same behaviorist frame. She doesn't talk about it as much, but like she sees it the same way. And so she has been like, the person who's going to have the biggest influence on who you are is the person who you hold in the highest esteem, who holds the most reinforcers in your life. And hopefully that's your spouse. And so your spouse is going to have a huge influence on your behavior and like how you act and how you kind of mold over time. And so we've had reciprocal kind of control over one another in terms of shaping and reshaping each other. And she knows what she's doing when she's reinforcing certain activities. And so do I, and so I think that being with Leila, she has encouraged me deliberately and indirectly to be more patient, for sure. I'm so much more patient, so much more, like just so much more patient since she's been in my life. I'm less angry than I was when we met. I would say I try to go out of my way more to be kind to others since we met. I would say I try to be more considerate since we met. And these are all behaviors I fundamentally learned from her. And so I would say like, I think I would say buying a spouse, but I think picking a spouse is almost like buying all of the behaviors that you'd like to have in the future from somebody else, and basically saying like, man, I got all these rough edges. If I married this person, I'd probably smooth out a little bit. And so I think a lot of it does is like you start here and then you kind of like slowly learn the best from one another. And I think we've both been better off from being together. Like on the flip side for her, I think she's gotten more aggressive. I think she's more direct since we've been together. I think she's less patient. And I think those things have benefited her. And so that's kind of like, that's our yin and yang. That's worked really well for like mutual personal development.
Alex, do you have to go through hell to become successful?
No. You have to learn the skills to become successful. And oftentimes learning those skills is painful because you don't know the skills when you're trying to learn them, and mistakes hurt. And so I think there's just a huge amount of skills that you have to learn in order to be successful. And if we define success as material success for business, at least, then it's just, there's so many things you have to learn. It's very hard to learn them scar-free. And I think that's really what it comes down to. But if someone were able to, like, you know, if your father were Rockefeller and you also had, you know, the proclivity to be ambitious, I'll bet you he could probably teach you a lot of the things that you wouldn't have to learn on your own. It probably would be significantly less painful. So I think it's degrees of hell. I'm sure there are some people who have suffered significantly more than others in order to be successful. Almost everyone has suffered in general to be successful, but I also think that people in general suffer. And so when we ask somebody who's successful, hey, do you think the reason that you're successful is because you had a hard childhood? Well, there's tons of people who had hard childhoods who are not successful. So is it the hard childhood or is it just other things? And so again, when I see people on both sides, then maybe this thing doesn't matter. It's not a variable worth studying. I just want to look for the few things that are in common. And the few things they all have in common is that they did certain behaviors that promoted activities, that promoted products. They had products that people loved and that they just kept buying. And they were able to do that at a price point that generated significant gross profits. They were able to reinvest in the business and gain disproportionate, you know, growth as a result. Like those are the things that must occur. In terms of the person themselves, I think suffering is a fact of life. And so poor people suffer and so do rich people. Everyone suffers, and everyone's just looking at the other side, hoping that the other one has an answer. Said differently, life is painful. Some people make money at the end and some people don't.
Yeah, I think a lot of people try to retrace the data. They look at the data and they're like, oh, it made sense because of this reason. But
yeah, it's only retracing it in retrospect.
I ask every guest at the end of the podcast, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received? But I'll change it for you a bit.
Wow.
If all your books, videos, and tweets were erased from the internet forever, and all you had was the next 60 seconds to leave to the world, what's the most useful thought you could leave to the world?
Figure out what you want, ignore the opinions of others, and do so much volume that it would be unreasonable that you would be unsuccessful.
Well, everyone, this has been your guest, Alex Hormozi. This is the Jack Neel Podcast. Appreciate you coming on.
Thanks.